In the 1960s, the Beatles were performing, there were many civil rights protests, and the space race was upon us. A competition to get the first man on the moon was active. The two strongest competitors were the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The two nations' economical power drove the other to go great lengths and spend great sums of money to make their facilities for spacecraft development. And, as a direct result of the hard work put in by the two nations, Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon, only 12 years after the race started. Despite the heavy competition, the two nations had incredible diplomacy as they did not sabotage the other nation to get their hands on space first, which in turn limited the damage caused by the race. While the United States and Soviet Union were allies in World War II, things changed during the Cold War. The United States feared the Soviet Union would attempt to spread communism and that would bring down the democracy that was already in place in the United States. Both sides also worried about the other's atomic bombs, and if a war broke out, the whole world would be destroyed, something neither side wanted. Thus started the endless stalemate of the Cold War. A clear, harmless way to go, the two sides chose to take on the space race. Winning it was a show of power. Whichever country won would seem to have more potential and therefore getting an advantage in the Cold War, without it ever happening. However, NASA worker Sergei Korkin states,
"If the Cold War ends, generals on either side would get less money from taxpayers, something neither side would benefit from."
October 4th, 1957, the launch of Sputnik 1. This amazing spacecraft was the beginning of the space race. The first launch was supposed to be Sputnik 3, but the Soviet Union found it too complicated and went with the much simpler design of Sputnik 1. It held the honor of being the first spacecraft in space, but it certainly wasn't going to be the last. The launch sparked America to come back and establish NASA, a space agency funded by the government to get satellites into space. After an early lead for the Soviet Union, this was a big step to get the United States back into the game. This was an example of how the competition and tension between the two countries caused some drastic movements. A large reason for the victory was communication. For the United States, almost everything happened at NASA, and everyone knew what was going on. The same cannot be said for the Soviet Union, as each employee only had a fraction of the bigger picture. In the beginning, satellites were used for weather observation and communication. Using the new rocket technology to send living things was just too risky. But the Soviet Union had the courage and took the first step. On November 3rd, 1957, just 1 month after the launch of Sputnik 1, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 2, only this time, the satellite had life. Inside Sputnik 2 lay space dog Laika, a cry to the rest of the world that the day humanity reaches space might not be too far away. Not letting us down, on April 12, 1961, only 3.5 years after the launch of the space race, Yuri Gagarin, a Soviet cosmonaut, became the first man in space. While both sides were competing as hard as they could, the unspoken etiquette was that they would not shed blood, with the goal of being better than the other. In turn, the Soviet Union ran through various tests they didn't go through with the earlier two Sputniks to ensure that Gagarin was coming home safely. Soon after that, due to the spark Gagarin caused, President John F. Kennedy told us this.
"We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too."
Not long after, in February of 1962, aboard the Freedom 7, John Glenn Jr. became the first American in space. After getting the first human in space, both sides were now looking at getting a human to the moon. The Soviets started the lunar program, sending many satellites to the moon. While Luna 2 had already gotten there, it crashed onto the moon's surface. However, on February 3rd, 1966, Luna 9 had a successful landing on the moon, meaning the Soviet Union had won again. One of the most prominent cases of diplomacy between the two nations was the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. A treaty that banned the testing of weaponry in outer space or on any other celestial body. This treaty specified the intentions of the space race. It prevented either side from having the hopes of using space for war. Instead, both countries knew what they were getting. The space race for science and sending a message, not for battle. During the time of the lunar program, the United States had been experimenting with rockets. They had come up with ones powerful enough to send people to the moon. They just needed a plan. Eager to make up for the 2 losses they already had, the United States were ready to put everything on the line to get to the moon. On May 18, 1969, Apollo 10 was launched, orbiting Americans around the moon 31 times, before returning safely back home. All previous launches had either failed or not brought back results as great as Apollo 10. The competition between the two countries was high, but the Soviet Union saw their chance of victory fleeting. During the planning leading up to Apollo 11, crew worked 24/7 from July 16, 1969 to July 24th. Those 8 days must have been some of the hardest working and most gruesome days for NASA. All this planning was important, however, as the Apollo 11 craft was very intricate. Finally, on July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched. This mission held Neil Armstrong, Edwin, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Upon landing, Armstrong and Aldrin climbed out of the spacecraft, and they had won the space race.
Sergei Korkin tells us that both countries had developed technology that the other one would love to use without putting in the work to develop it.
This sparked the two countries to come together in July of 1975 to launch the Apollo-Soyuz mission, where 2 Soviets and 3 Americans went into space together as a team. Here is NASA Deputy Project Scientist Alexander Marshak on how the space race changed the world.
Very positive, and so that kind of encourage governments, US, Russia, China, invest more in space, so that's very positive, and so they help each other, and even during Cold War, I believe it was 1975, it was a joint mission, Soyuz Apollo, and so they were together in space, and so that was really a good example. And now, of course, International Space Station. So we see the race, but nevertheless, it's a joint station between NASA, Russian Space Agency, European, Japanese, and I guess Canadian.
Korkin also says that in future competitions, such as the ongoing space race between US and China, the two sides should wish to work together instead of expending all their resources just to come out on top of the other.
When reflecting on the Cold War, Korkin says, competition, no matter how tough, is way more rewarding than war, Cold War or not.
Without the competition and stellar diplomacy, neither the Soviets nor the Americans may have ever gotten to the moon. Without competition and diplomacy, there would be no incentive to improve.